A preacher with a mysterious past receives a divine power from above. An African preacher delivers God's word when a strong wind knocks him down. The people applaud, thinking that the wind is a sign from God. However, the preacher stands up and tells him to be silent in an eerie voice. He declares himself as the chosen one, but his body suddenly explodes. With blood splattered everywhere, the audience runs in panic. In Texas, Jesse Custer delivers a sermon at a small church. Though his flock is bored by his speeches, Emily, the organist, even begins playing despite him not being done yet. Afterward, the community holds a feast outside the church. A young man named Chris informs Jesse that his father, Donnie, hurts his mother Betsy. Jesse decides to talk to his father, but Chris tells him that talking won't do anything. Instead, he wants Jesse to hurt his father. Jesse reminds him that it's a sin, but Chris mentions rumors claiming Jesse did things before becoming a preacher. However, Jesse figures that Donnie and his friends will seek revenge, and the cycle of violence will just continue. Unimpressed, Chris tells him to pray for him and walks away. That evening, an unveiling of the city's new mascot happens, but it ends up sparking a riot. Seeing this, Jesse returns to his truck, and Sheriff Hugo Root approaches him. He asks him to come by their house to talk to his son, so Jesse promises to stop by tomorrow night. He then informs Hugo that Donnie is hurting Betsy, but the sheriff notes that he needs a formal complaint from the victim. Jesse points out that she might be scared in that situation, but Hugo still refuses. The sheriff recalls that he was worried when he heard Jesse was returning to his father's town. However, Jesse has been quiet so far, so he advises him to continue being so. Meanwhile, a flight attendant named Cassidy entertains his passengers on their flight to Tijuana. When he goes to the bathroom, he finds a Bible with disturbing notes. Realizing something, Cassidy goes outside and points out that the plane isn't going to Tijuana, given that they're heading towards the sun. He then smacks one of the men and sets another on fire. Few of the men suddenly brandish their weapons, but Cassidy utilizes their weapons against them. When the pilot enters, Cassidy breaks a wine bottle and hurls it at him, stabbing him with it. Suddenly, the co-pilot pours holy water on him, but it doesn't affect him. Instead, Cassidy bites the man's neck, revealing himself as a vampire. The plane begins to sound alarms, so he uses the broken wine bottle from the pilot's body to pour himself some blood. He then takes an umbrella and jumps off. The next day, Ted talks to Jesse about his mother's calls, which annoys the preacher. He advises Ted to open his heart and be honest, so Ted agrees and leaves. Then, Emily informs Jesse that her coworker Walter is sick, so he should check on him. In Africa, two guys investigate the preacher who exploded. Meanwhile, Jesse visits Walter and sees him sleeping. He then hears someone in the shower and notices a gun on the desk. Suspicious, Jesse leaves. The woman from the shower then looks out the window, watching Jesse drive away. Not long ago, two guys and a woman fought in a car while driving into a cornfield in Kansas. One guy got shot and died, while the other fought the girl. The girl attempted to shoot him, but the guy was in the back seat, making it difficult. He pulled her into the back seat, where they fought as the car sped into the cornfield. With her pinned down, the girl punched her opponent and bit off his ear. She then returned to the driver's seat and parked the car. The man got out of the car, so the girl shoved a corn cob into his mouth, letting her retrieve a map from him. Afterward, she encountered two kids whose parents had left. Her cell phone alerted her that another enemy would arrive, so she devised a plan. Using recycled materials, the girl had the kids help her create a homemade bazooka. Later, the girl hid the kids in their basement and told them not to come outside as if there was a tornado. Then, the sound of gunfire, bombs, and screams occurred, shocking the kids. When it became silent, the kids went out and found bodies and a destroyed helicopter, which they found awesome. The girl apologized to them for the commotion and prepared to leave. She revealed her name as Priscilla Jean Henrietta O'Hare, but everyone else identified her as Tulip. At present, Cassidy crashes into a field with his internal organs spilled out since the umbrella he was carrying broke. He then spots a cow and devours the entire thing. Elsewhere, Jesse confronts Betsy about her relationship with Donnie, to which she replies that everything is okay. He advises Betsy to let him know if Donnie ever causes her harm or if there is a problem. Betsy finally admits that Donnie constantly hurt her and burned her yesterday with a teapot. Jesse advises her to tell Hugo about it, but Betsy declines because she enjoys Donnie hurting her. Meanwhile, in Russia, the investigators arrive at a church where a priest hysterically recounts an attack that ended with another preacher exploding. That evening, Jesse meets Tulip, who thanks him for checking on her uncle Walter, revealing that she was the woman in the shower earlier. Tulip talks about a job, but Jesse refuses to take it, even if it's another job to end all jobs. He's satisfied at being a preacher, though Tulip points out that he's bad at it. She thinks he just returned to the town to fill his father's shoes, which he doesn't deny. She comments that them hating each other makes things easier, but Jesse insists that he's not doing the jobs again. He also claims that he doesn't hate her, but she thinks he will. Pissed, Jesse leaves the car while Tulip reminds him that they are what they are. Jesse then visits Hugo's home. There, he watches Hugo make a blend using vegetables and raw meat. He then hands the smoothie to Jesse, asking him to bring it to his son. Cautiously, Jesse heads up and meets Hugo's son, Eugene, who greets him with glee. With his mouth deformed, Eugene drinks the smoothie as his meal. Eugene then shyly shares that his dad has stopped him from attending church because his condition is distracting. Jesse encourages him to be there if he wants, but Eugene thinks God is angry with him for sinning. The preacher reminds him that God would forgive him if he repents. He claims God is there for him when he needs him and doesn't hold grudges. Later, Cassidy approaches Jesse at the bar and asks him about the town. When Jesse claims he doesn't understand him, Cassidy goes away. Suddenly, Donnie arrives and punches Jesse for speaking to his wife without first consulting him. Jesse claims this isn't a time to fight since they're at war, but Donnie kicks him. During this, Cassidy talks to someone on the phone, complaining how they keep finding him, so he asks for help and money, but the other person hangs up on him. While kicking Jesse, Donnie hints that he knows who tattled about him beating Betsy, so he has someone else to attend to after this. Jesse gets up and orders him not to touch Chris, otherwise Donnie will make a sound like a rabbit in a bear trap. Unamused, Donnie removes his jacket and attempts to hit Jesse. Jesse blocks the punch and shatters glass on his head. He beats Donnie and his crew, proving they are no match for Jesse. A man tries to strike Jesse from behind, but Cassidy kicks a chair in his direction, knocking him to the ground. After that, Jesse approaches Donnie and asks if he's ready to make the sound. Hugo attempts to stop him, but Jesse still breaks Donnie's arm. Consequently, Jesse and Cassidy get arrested. While behind bars, Jesse laments how awful he's been as a preacher, finally agreeing that Tulip might have been right and that he shouldn't have returned to town. Curious, Jesse admits that he made a promise but broke it 1,000 times. Cassidy argues that the world is better off without promises and faith, pointing out how awful things still happen everywhere. He even defends that he doesn't care about anything and feels fantastic about it. The sheriff then arrives and informs Jesse that Emily paid for his release. He thanks Cassidy for helping him out before leaving. At Emily's van with her kids, Jesse decides that he'll stop preaching since he doesn't think that it's for him. He thanks Emily for everything she'd done for him and the church, but she ignores this, noting that he wasn't truly there anyway. After dropping him off, Emily's kids fight over the iPad, so she snatches it and smashes it while holding back tears. Meanwhile, Ted contacts Jesse to complain about his mother again. However, Jesse sees the church's light flickering and the door constantly slamming, so he hangs up and heads to the church. Jesse then considers praying one final time if he senses God's presence. However, nothing happens, so he smokes and curses. The door suddenly opens slowly, and an invisible entity approaches him and knocks him out. While unconscious, Jesse recalls his father telling him to be one of the good men because there were already too many bad ones. His father then got shot in the head right in front of him. After 3 days, Jesse wakes up with Emily watching him. Emily reveals that Cassidy found him passed out in the church. The man has now moved into the church attic to work. Then, she apologizes for how she spoke to him the other night. However, Jesse tells her she was right. While walking to the church, Ted approaches Jesse and complains about his mother again. Annoyed, Jesse instructs Ted to tell her the truth and opens his heart. Jesse then hears a sound, but Ted suddenly hurries away. At church, Cassidy and Tulip show up. Jesse announces that there's no sermon and that he has let them down. Jesse apologizes for being a lousy preacher and almost announces that he's quitting. But he pauses and looks at his audience. As if realizing something, he points out that they need a better preacher, so he'll be better for them. Meanwhile, Ted visits his mother to speak the truth and open his heart. When he arrives, he tells her to stop calling to criticize him, pleading to be treated with respect and consideration. Suddenly, Ted pulls a knife and opens his heart. He seizes his heart and hands it to his mother, prompting her to scream. Surprisingly, the two investigators arrive in town and declare that it's here. In 1881, a man headed out to find medicine for his sick daughter. After days of travel, he met travelers who invited him to a meal. The family was traveling to the west, thinking it was paradise. However, the man disagreed with this. One day, Jesse baptizes others while the investigators spy on him. Later, Cassidy asks Emily for an advance salary, but she refuses. She then tells Jesse that Cassidy is acting strangely and has consumed the communion wine. As a result, Jesse goes to Cassidy but notices him talking with Eugene until his father calls him. Alone, Cassidy asks what happened to Eugene. So Jesse explains that Eugene attempted to kill himself with a shotgun but just wound up hurting his face. Jesse then advises him not to make any trouble, to which Cassidy agrees. Then, Linus, a school bus driver, confesses to Jesse that he's obsessed with one of his passengers. Jesse reminds him that she's a little girl, so Linus asks if the preacher can't tell his confession to anyone, which he begrudgingly confirms. Jesse loses attention as Linus continues. Nonetheless, he tells Linus to repent and not act on his urges. That night, Jesse smokes and gets annoyed with a dog barking. He commands the dog to be quiet, and surprisingly, it stops barking. The following day, Odin Quincannon purchases a couple's home. Donnie, who works for him, drops the contract because of his injured hand, so a worker named Clive helps him. As soon as the papers were signed, Odin's men demolish the place. In their van, Donnie slams Clive's face onto the steering wheel for making him look helpless earlier. Meanwhile, Jesse and Emily ask for suggestions on how to improve their church. Suddenly, the school bus Linus drives by, so Jesse decides to follow him, only to find his steering wheel missing. Tulip arrives and sarcastically says the baptism changed her. Jesse then finds his wheel on top of a streetlight. Later, Jesse arrives at the church, and Cassidy invites him to drink. During this, Cassidy questions if God has a plan for him, so Jesse claims that God's goal for him is to be in church, serve people, and preach the gospel. Cassidy sarcastically claims that God's plan for him is to inform Jesse that his plan for him is stupid. Pissed, Jesse points out that wandering about without a plan is selfish. Then, Cassidy asks Jesse if his father trained him to fight, but Jesse says it's someone else. Jesse then asks about Cassidy, so he claims that he's a 119-year-old vampire who's on the run from vampire hunters. He adds that he's drinking rubbing alcohol, a coffee machine descaler, and dirt off the back of the air conditioner. Intrigued, Jesse takes the container, but Cassidy warns that it's too strong for him. Still, Jesse drinks and passes out while Cassidy grabs his keys and money. Soon, the investigators arrive at the church and find Jesse unconscious, so they prepare their tools. While one plays music, the other places a can on Jesse's chest. The guy begins to sing, but the ritual fails, so they go for plan B, slash Jesse with a chainsaw. Luckily, Cassidy arrives and assumes the men are vampire hunters. The attacker shoots Cassidy in the stomach while the other man tries to slash Jesse. However, the man approaches Cassidy, who bites his leg. Cassidy stabs the man with a glass, but he fights back. The man with a chainsaw tries to strike Cassidy but instead hits his partner. Cassidy then slams the other man with a book until he dies. Cassidy and the chainsaw wielder battle over the weapon, but Cassidy ultimately turns it on him, cutting his arm. He then stops the chainsaw as it continues to travel near Jesse. Elsewhere, Tulip gambles in when Mosey asks how Walter is doing, so she promises to ask him if he isn't passed out drunk. A guy in the back then laughs, so Tulip recounts how Walter ran over 2 kids and a goat in a zoo because he was drunk. Meanwhile, Cassidy consumes the men's blood, thus healing his wounds. Then he cleans up the church, but when he's about to bury the bodies, it's already morning, so he can't go outside. Later, Emily wakes Jesse up for his next appointment while delivering a casserole. Emily comments that the chapel smells like death, but Jesse jokes that it's her casserole. Afterward, Jesse visits Mrs. Loach's house, whose daughter is in a coma. She's sure her daughter can still hear her and emphasizes that they're okay. He assures the mother that the Lord's light will reach them and change everything. Still, Mrs. Loach claims that words cannot open her daughter's eyes. Leaving the house, Jesse sees Linus' bus again. Jesse later drives down a road but stops as he finds something in his path. As he approaches, someone tases him. Jesse soon wakes up in chains. A masked woman arrives, but it's just Tulip. She took him to get his attention and informs him that the map she had was for Danny, so she intends to sell it for interesting information. However, Jesse doesn't care about it. Tulip argues that what he did to Donnie proves that he's still the same man as before. She then whispers to his ear that she'll keep asking him to do the job with her until he agrees. As Tulip leaves, she reveals that his chain wasn't actually tied to anything. Jesse later saws off the chain from his foot when Eugene approaches him. Eugene admits that the baptism hasn't changed him, so he requests another one. However, Jesse says it's too late, so he has to keep trying to be better. However, Eugene wonders if God wants him to stay the same. This makes Jesse realize something. Jesse immediately goes to Linus' house and punches him. He accuses Linus of still not forgetting his obsession with the girl. Thus, he turns on the water in the tub to perform another baptism. Linus tries to convince Jesse to stop, promising that he'll change. However, Jesse puts Linus' head on the tub while ordering him to forget about the girl. On the third try, Jesse's voice changes, shocking him. Surprisingly, Linus literally forgets about the girl, revealing that Jesse can control people with his words. Meanwhile, Cassidy finally buries the bodies. Elsewhere, however, the same men are speaking to Hugo, claiming that they're from the government. The following day, Jesse goes to Mrs. Loach's house. He approaches her daughter and commands her to open her eyes.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.